The Navy today honoured the memory of the two bravehearts who died on board INS Sindhuratna, the Indian submarine involved in a major mishap on Wednesday when several compartments of the tiny submarine were filled with smoke, possibly the result of a fire in the battery compartment. Neither of the two men lived to be 30 years old. Lieutenant Commander Kapish Muwal was just 26, Lieutenant Manoranjan Kumar 25. When smoke engulfed their submarine, these men went beyond their call of duty, running into harm's way and saving the lives of their colleagues. In the end, they were trapped in the compartment of the submarine, which by then had been sealed off.
My brother was a genius. He willingly joined the Navy because he wanted to serve the nation.
बहुत जांबाज लड़का था, बहुत मिलनसार, मृदुभाषी और बहुत आइडियल.
Well, two young lives snuffed out over there. The latest mishap to affect the Indian Navy, but we focused so much in the last couple of days on these accidents in the Navy. I think it's also time to perhaps reflect on the bravery of these men and also to reflect on just how difficult it is to operate submarines. Joining us now to look at this, Vice Admiral retired Suresh Bangara, the former Chief of the Southern Naval Command, and Rear Admiral Raja Menon, the former Vice Chief of Naval Staff Operations. Admiral Menon is one of India's most experienced submariners. He knows submarines inside out. When he was in service, he was on submarines for several months every year. Admiral, the first thing that we know that these two men did is when there was smoke, when there was fire, they ran and they tried to find out what happened, and they pushed and they kicked out people, their colleagues, sailors, from the areas where there was this smoke. This needs an extraordinary sense of courage, because they would know that a fire on a submarine is as lethal as it gets. Admiral Menon, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, this is true. An emergency in a submarine when it's underwater is the most terrible event that can happen. And of course, one practices drills to overcome these emergencies. But the drills involve the fact that you have to isolate the compartment. And no one mentions this, but everyone is aware that in the case of a real emergency, those inside the compartment are likely to be isolated, probably with fatal consequences. But in this particular case, I'm not sure of the exact details, but it appears that these two have shut themselves into this compartment to deal with the emergency and push their colleagues out, and thereby being overcome by the fumes. I think this is an extraordinary act of courage, and only people who serve in submarines can appreciate that split-second decision on the basis of which these two sacrificed their lives.
Admiral Bangara, they both won the Sword of Honor for young naval officers. That's the ultimate goal that you're looking to achieve as you enter the Navy. But it also means that the Navy has lost two very skilled people. Not everybody wins the Sword of Honor.
Yes, Vishnu, it's a prized possession of a young officer when he's just graduating from training. Undoubtedly, they were the best, and some of the very best officers volunteer for the submarine arm. And I wish to point out, in addition to what my senior colleague Admiral Menon said, that you will notice that most of the sailors were out, and to the best of my knowledge, they are in the hospital, but the officers took the brunt of it. And that is how our officer cadre in the Army, Air Force and the Navy have been setting an example, and I'm very proud of them.
Admiral Menon, you want to add to that, because Admiral Bangara raises an important point. You know, we've seen this in all our wars, but most recently in Kargil, where there was a disproportionate number of young officers who died. But because that's the way, in that case, the Indian army fought, and we always do that. We push officers in the front. Leadership has to be from the front, or there is no leadership. How is that very much a part of the ethos of submarine operations?
In submarines, normally, it's a very collective effort. But there are times when you come across circumstances that are simply too horrible to describe, because that is what I want to try and emphasize to people who have never been on board a submarine, that when you have an emergency underwater, the circumstances are unbelievably bad. And it's a split-second decision at that time as to whether you're going to lead to the extent that you know that you may not come out of it alive. And I have a feeling that these two officers took that split-second decision. So, you know, you get mixed feelings as far as this incident is concerned. On the one hand, you know that it's a tragic loss of two outstanding officers. But at the same time, there is a feeling of some satisfaction that the procedures and the training and the long years that the officers undergo the training and the values that are instilled in them have obviously resulted in the right decisions being taken in a critical emergency by these two young officers. They have made everyone who is an officer in the Navy proud to be an officer.
Yeah. Admiral Bangara, and this is something that not many would perhaps know, that in a situation like this, when there is a fire in a confined space, whether it's a warship or a submarine in this particular case, a compartment is deliberately sealed off, even if it means the loss of life, because the goal is to save more lives and possibly the ship or the submarine itself. This is a reality which all submariners know about, that they may be alive when they go into a compartment, but if that compartment is sealed off, they may die in the larger interests of the crew of that ship or of that submarine.
Yes, I wouldn't even dare to talk about the submarine aspects, because although I've been on submarines during patrols, Raja Menon is so much more qualified to talk about it. But certainly on the surface ship, there is that danger of when the flooding starts, you might have to lock down compartments, and that is there. But this is, as Admiral Menon mentioned, all these are part of the drills that we go through, and I can tell you, having gone through the 71 operations, nobody thinks of his life at that moment. We just follow the drill and the SOPs, and nothing else matters at that point in time. So you will not find people thinking about their life at that action.
Admiral Menon, there is also the use of highly toxic gas. It serves two purposes. It's actually meant to save lives, but after a period of time, when there is a fire, you can actually end up killing some officers on board. Perhaps that's what happened here. And specifically, there is freon gas or other agents which are used, which are extremely effective in, I'm told, shutting down fires, but extremely toxic to the human system. So it's a difficult sort of choice that has to be taken. The question is, was this activated automatically, or was this activated from the ops center of the submarine?
I'm not quite clear as to whether the system was activated or it activates itself. But if it is not activated, it will activate itself. But that the freon gas is not the only toxic substance in the compartment of a submarine. There are lots of other toxic substances. So this is the reason why when you go through that drill, you must actually see a submarine emergency drill. There is a certain fierceness about that drill, because what is instilled in you is that when the actual time comes, it is only going through that drill in an unthinking fashion sometimes that can save the lives of the remaining members of the crew. So it's not just the freon. There are other toxic substances in a submarine. And when there is a fire, the circumstances are unbelievably bad in a submarine. Of course, in peacetime, there is the advantage that you can convert a submerged emergency into a surfaced emergency. So in this particular case, this crew has been tested by fire and they have come out of it very well. As I said in my last interview, I think one of the great satisfaction that one can take is that this particular crew has handled a submerged emergency and come out of it alive. But it wouldn't have happened but for the heroic sacrifice of these two young, brilliant officers.
Admiral Bangara, we are told that the commanding officer of the submarine is actually very sick. He was on the ventilator in the hospital. And that's because he also chose to come down to try and save the lives of these two officers when they realized that they'd gone missing. And he ended up inhaling a lot of these fumes himself. We hope he gets better. We don't know what his immediate condition is. But this is yet another example of taking responsibility. The captain of the boat, it's his boat. It's his life when he's out there at sea, and he had to do this quite naturally.
You know what you said takes me back to 1971 when we lost Captain Mullah,
Yes.
who sat on the bridge in his chair to make sure everyone else was clear of the ship, Kukri. And we are talking in 2014, a similar sort of an instance. What does it prove? It proves that our commanding officers are quite motivated, and they want to first pay attention to their crew before looking after themselves. And I'm very happy that you mentioned, I didn't know about this.
Menon, we've spoken and you've spoken in the last couple of days about the need for the submarine force to increase its fleet numbers, that we are desperately short about submarines. We could keep talking about that, but let's not. Let's, Admiral Menon, focus on the fact that for the next little while we're going to have to deal with these submarines which we have. How dangerous is that likely to be going forward? We've lost the Sindhurakshak and we've almost lost the Sindhuratna, but the problem lies certainly in the case of the Sindhuratna with her batteries. These submarines go out on patrol, sir. What risks are going to happen going forward? These submarines are 25 years old.
Yeah, these submarines are 25 years old, and quite often you come across a class of warship which tends to be more difficult to run than other classes of the same kind of warship. The Kilo is one of these, and of course there will be a board of inquiry that will establish, but I would encourage this board of inquiry to cast its net wider, in the sense that there are reasons to believe that this Sindhuratna was operating with batteries which were probably beyond their guaranteed life. It's not that submarines have not done that before, but is it really necessary? Could it have been avoided? These are questions that arise. And if indents were placed for a fresh battery, who was responsible for seeing that, who was responsible for the delay in the procurement of a replacement battery?
Sure.
Or could the circumstances have been avoided? I mean, a lot of questions arise, and I really hope that the Board of Inquiry casts its net wide to prevent recurrence of this kind of tragedy.
Admiral Bangara, final question to you. The Kilo class submarine, it's being reported for all the wrong reasons. Firstly, we lost Sindhurakshak, horrific explosion, 18 men dead. This submarine just about survived. We've lost 2 men over here. But the submarine itself has been described as a hole in the water, which is exactly what you want of a submarine. I'm told it's extremely quiet and it's actually quite potent.
Well, I am myself an anti-submarine warfare officer, and for much of my time in the fleet, I have trained anti-submarine warfare officers, and what you're saying is absolutely right. It's got certain strengths that the other submarines didn't have. It had a weapon package that the others didn't have. We had the German submarines, which has turned out to be a very good buy for us, but quite unfortunately, as you know, HTW got blacklisted, and then the entire production line in Mazagon docks was seized. Now that is something of great strategic value and a biggest blunder that perhaps we made, for which we are paying the price today. But coming back to the Kilos, they have been the mainstay of the submarine arm when the numbers were low. They are now aging, but certainly in operational capabilities, they had many pluses too.
and missile armed as well at this stage. I'd like to thank both of you very much for joining us this evening. It's been an opportunity to reflect on the courage of the men who have died. It's been an opportunity to perhaps reflect on how difficult it is for submarine operations to take place. I'd like to thank both of you very much for joining us. Completely out of time. You've been watching The Buck Stops Here. Do stay tuned.